Awesome. All right, welcome everyone. So where we're going to be picking up is on page 156. Page 156, and we are on the third full paragraph. But life was not easy. Isn't that life? I know I made a very similar joke at the start of the meeting. And you know, the key to humor is repeating yourself. That's what's known as the funniest. Anywho, so just the context of what we're talking about. On page 156, we're talking about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so when it says, but life was not easy for the two friends are Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob. And what we spoke about last week was Bill Wilson and his first successful 12-step call, which began the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, which I just love because the history of AA does not start when one alcoholic gets sober. Well, I mean, the history starts, but the Alcoholics Anonymous, its date of being founded is the date, not when Bill Wilson got sober, not when there was one, but when there was two. Bill Wilson carrying the message to Dr. Bob. And what we saw last week was Bill Wilson being the first person that Dr. Bob had ever spoken to who knew anything about alcoholism from his own lived practical experience, not from books and theories and any of that. But he was an alcoholic who drank how he drank. He was an alcoholic who could not keep sober the way that he could not stay sober. He had the same illness, and yet he had recovered. In fact, not only had he recovered, but he had recovered by the very same means that Dr. Bob was trying. Dr. Bob was in the Oxford group and could not stay sober. And Dr. Bob, he has this awareness that, man, I've got to do this thing. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to get sober and to stay sober, except amends, not those ones. But everything else, I know nobody can relate to that. And what happens? Well, he goes to Atlantic City, he goes on a bender, and he comes back. And what happens after he comes back to Akron, Ohio? Was he goes on what I like to call an amender. So he goes out and he makes all the amends that he was afraid to make. And that's what permanent sobriety, it's on the other side of those spiritual actions I don't want to take. But when he went out and made all his amends, that marked the first date of his continuous sobriety. And that's where we're picking up on page 156, third full paragraph. But life was not easy for the two friends. Plenty of difficulties presented themselves. And this is pointing about the reality that two things are true. The first thing that is true is that we have profound spiritual awakenings, spiritual experiences which transform us from the inside out. And life still happens, which is rude. It's rude of it to continuing to happen to me, but I got sober. I wrote some inventory. Everything should be peachy keen by now. What's this about? And so life still happens. And I want to emphasize that these 12 steps, one, that they are a way of life. That this is not a set it and forget it program. This is how I need to live my life. But also that this is a way of life that works when nothing else is working. This is a way of life that works when life is hitting, when life is kicking our butt. This works. And we know this to be true. Because if it didn't, none of us would be here. Because I'm the sort of person, I stub my toe and it's a little bit too much and I need a drink or two to take the edge off, right? And believe me when I say significantly more than a stub toe has happened to me in sobriety. And if my sobriety was contingent on a series of actions that only worked when life was good, I would not be here. If my sobriety was contingent on a course of action that only worked when things were easy, I would not be here. This works in rough going. It says, both saw that they, and I'm going to point this out, must keep spiritually active. I want to emphasize the must and spiritually active. I have to emphasize the whole sentence. But the must, I'm going to make a little joke. It's a little musty in here. We should open a window. It's musty, you know. I thought there were no musts. Well, it's musty. They must keep spiritually active. And what does keeping spiritually active look like? Well, what we're going to see, spoilers, is that they are going to continue to work with others. They're going to look for somebody else to help. Now, of course, they've got to continue to do their own work. Every morning, they would start with their morning quiet time. They would start with their prayer, their meditation, their practice that was two-way prayer. And they would continue to take their own inventory. They would continue to grow in this way of life. So they weren't trying to give away that which they did not have. They were making sure they had it to give it away. But they saw that they must keep spiritually active, must carry this message to others. And I'll use the word sponsorship, not found in the first 164 pages, but the job description is all over it, and that's what we're talking about. And welcome, we're on page 156. So it says, one day they called up the head nurse of a local hospital. So they're calling up, and this was probably not the head nurse that they were talking to, but there's some history groups that are doing reading a book on Sister Ignatia. And Sister Ignatia, she's one of those non-alcoholic women who just kicked butt and took names and just the best. You know, you guys know my love of Henrietta Seiberling. Well, Sister Ignatia is one of those homegirls. Just love her. And if you're like, I don't know how I feel about Sister Ignatia, let me sell you on her. And it's not even a hard sell. This is a soft sell. If you are like, you know what I really enjoy in my meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous? Coffee. You can thank Sister Ignatia. She thought we could use it. And I will point out, standing ovation on that one. I will point out, we are people who in early sobriety will chug back cups and cups and cups of coffee at 8 p.m. and wonder, why can't I sleep? You know, that's us. Can't make the connection. No judgment. I'm just pointing it out. Also, if you like medallions, those like medallions, the chips, the coins, that's Sister Ignatia. What she would do, now to be fair, what she would do is not an accurate assessment of how alcoholics operate, but when she would, and this is another reason to love her, is she would smuggle alcoholics into the hospital. She's like, yeah, he's got tuberculosis. We're going to help him. Because maybe it wasn't that blatant, but you know what I mean? She's like, because the hospitals didn't want to deal with alcoholics. So she and Dr. Bob would like smuggle them in so that they could help them. And I mean, how do you not love a gal like that? And she would give them these Sacred Heart pendants, these Sacred Heart medallions. You know, she's a sister, she's Catholic, so, you know, that's a thing. And here's what she said. She said, now, if you want to go get drunk, what you have to do is you have to go and bring me back that pendant before you drink. And would that keep anyone sober? No, but is it just fun? Absolutely. I love that. Nobody wants to let that sister down. And also just a fun fact, while I'm off on a Sister Ignatia tangent that I didn't plan to be on. Nobody planned this. Sister Ignatia. She before she was transferred to the hospital where she worked with alcoholics, she was working in music, and that was so stressful for her that she had a nervous breakdown. So her respite from the stress of being involved in music was to smuggle drunks into the hospital. So I'm just gonna listen. I don't have a say on who gets sainthood, but I think she could use it. That's all I'm saying. So that's Sister Ignatia. But so one day they called up the head nurse of a local hospital. They explained their need and inquired if she had a first-class prospect. And what was their need? Their need was to find somebody to help, somebody to take through the steps. That's how we keep spiritually active. And time again in this book, it tells me if I want permanent contented sobriety, I've got to work with others. I've got to sponsor others. I've got to carry this message to others. It takes me out of myself when nothing else is working. And so we must keep spiritually active. All right. So it says, so they're looking for a first-class alcoholic prospect. Thank goodness they didn't put us in classes, because I promise you, I'm not first class. I'm economy. I mean, some of you are first class for sure, but I'm at the back. Alrighty. And she says, yes, she replied, we've got a corker. He's just beaten up a couple nurses, goes off his head completely when he's drinking, but he's a grand chap when he's sober, though he's been in here 8 times in the last 6 months. So there's a lot of information in those few sentences. First of all, he's beaten up a couple of nurses where it's like, hey, do you have an alcoholic I could work with? And I kind of can tell that they were hoping, give me an easy one. Give me an alcoholic that maybe crochets doilies. Or I don't think it's crochet that you do doilies with, but you know what I mean? Like, give me one of those sorts of alcoholics, you know? And she's like, I got one for you. He beat up the nurses. We've got him tied down. You know, it's like, oh, great. And we're gonna see that is actually a blessing. And I'll throw this out, like, this is a book of mirrors. Now, not you guys. I know nobody would ever judge a brand new sponsee that they had and would ever feel this feeling of like, oh boy, what have I gotten myself into? Only to experience them being like this amazing transformation. And not that we have favorites, but it's like, oh my gosh, look what happened to this one, you know? So who knows? And when it says, goes off his head completely when he's drinking, this is a sign that he has the physical allergy. So the allergy of the body, for those that aren't sure, the allergy of the body is what happens when I take that first drink. And I take that drink, I feel the effect, and it's that thing that sets off inside of me that tells me I need more. And the more that I drink, the louder that more gets. And the fact that he goes off his head completely when he's drinking is a sign that he has the allergy. That's the first part of our illness. But he's a grand chap when he's sober, though he's been here 8 times in the last 6 months. That is indicative that he has the obsession of the mind. Because, I'm throwing this out there, if somebody does not have the allergy, they stop drinking before hospitalization. Just in case anyone was unsure. Any of us make our way through the ER and or the psych wards? That's me. Yeah, frequent flyer. That's less lately already. So, also, if somebody has the ability to choose whether they would drink or not, and they saw that when they drank, it ended them up in the hospital, they would stop and stay stopped on their own power. And we can guarantee that every single time he got out of the hospital, he's like, I'm not going to do that again. I'm done. I'm swearing off. And so it's a sign he's got the obsession of the mind. So we're seeing the 2 symptoms that make up alcoholism right here. And it goes on to say, understand he was once a well-known lawyer in town, but just now we've got him strapped down tight, which, based on the punching nurses, sounds like a good plan of action, you know. I don't work in healthcare, but, you know, I can just surmise. And if you're like, who is this guy? Well, this is Bill Dotson. And he is AA number 3. He's often referred to as the man on the bed. And there's this famous painting of a man in the bed and 2 AA members 12-stepping. And it's sort of a reenactment of that scene, even if it's not a literal visual representation. So this is the story of Bill Dotson, AA number 3. Here was a prospect, all right, but by the description, none too promising. Although, if you've worked with a lot of people before, you're actually like, oh boy. And it does help that they're tied down. It makes for a captive audience. I'm kidding. We don't do that. Oh. But it says, here's a prospect, all right, but by the description, none too promising. The use of spiritual principles in such cases was not so well understood as it is now. And when we talk about spiritual principles, how I always simplify it is that the spiritual principles are the tangible actions of the 12 steps. And they didn't understand what it was like to be successful. Like Dr. Bob, he was Bill Wilson's first successful 12-step call. So he didn't really have a full understanding of things like the window of willingness that I talk about. And he didn't have a full understanding about, you know, the desperation and the hopelessness. And you know, this is Dr. Bob's first go at it, essentially. And so it's an interesting thing. The last couple days I've been in conversations with several people about, man, I've been working with a lot of people, but not a lot of them are staying sober. And I've had a couple conversations with, again, like all over talking about this. And what I've been saying, and it just ties in right here, what I've been saying is, if you are trying and failing, one, we're not failing, but if we're trying and they're not staying sober, we are well ahead of those who aren't even trying. And every time I work with somebody, regardless of how it goes, what it does is it gives me more experience to draw upon, more experience to help others. You see, if I'm like, man, I'm not helping anyone, I'm helping others down the road. And I speak a lot about how my sponsorship style has changed over the years, because I was doing things because that's what my sponsor did with me. And turns out that can be survivorship bias, you know, just because this little keener, I wasn't keener when I got here. that developed over time. But that just because that doesn't mean everyone can do it. And I began to see things like, man, I lose people at step 4. I lose a lot of people at step 4. What if and it just was intuitive. Why don't I sit with them and help them? And that started to work. And then, spoilers, losing a lot of people at step 9. They don't really want to do those things that none of us want to do. Amends, you know? And why don't I sit with them and help them make the amends, help them make the approach, help them put it together? And you know what I mean? Like, I started to do what was more effective. And I'm not saying I sponsored the right way. I'm not saying that. But what I'm saying is the more experience I have, the more experience I have. And so none of it is wasted. And at this point, they're diving in. The only way to get experience is by getting experience. The only way to do it is to do it. I got to do it. And so they didn't wait until they were ready. They dove in because they knew they needed to keep spiritually active. And they didn't know that they were kind of hoping like, oh, could I get somebody that's, you know, just making their doilies? And here's the thing, I'm just off on tangents. You guys are used to that. But you know what? I say this a lot. I find it a lot easier to work with chronic relapsers. I find it easy. And that doesn't make sense unless you've done it. But who is the most difficult to work with? Somebody who has been sober for a very long time and has not worked the steps or hasn't worked a set of steps in many, many, many years. Those are the most difficult. But what do I think if I don't have any experience? I'm like, give me the one that's 30 years sober and is really angry about everything. Give me her, you know? And it's like, you know what's easiest? Give me the person that can't make it 3 days. I'm like, let me at them. It's way easier. But we don't know that until we do it, and that's what they're saying. So it says, but one of the friends, probably Dr. Bob, because he's the one that had the pull at the hospital, put him in a private room, will be down. So it says 2 days later, they waited for him to detox. 2 days later, a future fellow of Alcoholics Anonymous stared glassily at the strangers beside his bed. Who are you fellows? And why this private room? I was always in a ward before. Said one of the visitors, we're giving you a treatment for alcoholism. And welcome, we're on page 157, second full paragraph. It says, hopelessness was written large on the man's face. And I want to emphasize hopelessness, because that hopelessness is fertile soil for the hope that we have to offer. That coming to the end of myself. So he's in a good place. The window's a little cracked open. So hopelessness was written large on the man's face as he replied, oh, but that's no use. Nothing would fix me. I'm a goner. To say that I'm a goner is to be aware of his hopelessness. He doesn't have the information of step 1, but he's got an intuitive sense of his hopelessness. The last 3 times I got drunk on the way home from here. Now, we don't need to do a show of hands, but anyone go to the hospital, the emergency room, a detox center, a psych ward, a treatment center, a sober living, and get drunk on your way out, you know? All I'm saying is, that sounds a little like the obsession of the mind to me. Especially if you didn't have, I don't know how the American system works, but especially if you didn't have a copay, you know what I mean? If you had to pay out of pocket for that rehab, oh boy, I don't know how it works. Alrighty. So it goes on to say, I'm afraid to go out the door. I can't understand it. And what we're seeing, and welcome, we're on page 157, second full paragraph, that place of hopelessness. And that is the fertile soil. The window is open. He's able to see his predicament. For an hour, the two friends told him about their drinking experiences. And so what would they share? They would share their examples of the cycle. They would share their examples of when, they would go to the hospital, or they would say, that's it, I'm never going to drink again. And what would happen is they would be sober for a day, 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years, and then inevitably a thought would come and they would say, or think this time is different. Nobody will ever know. I just got to get it out of my system. My problem was drinking in New York, but we're in Akron, Ohio, the rubber capital of America. There's, what I mean? There's no drunks here. And whatever the effort, whatever it was that it hit, and they would go back and drink again. And what were they sharing? They were sharing their own experience, their experience with the allergy, their experience with the obsession. And this is where war stories can be really helpful. I don't find them for me, I'm not telling anyone else what to do for them, but for me, I don't find them helpful if I share them like at the podium or that sort of thing. But where they're helpful is when I'm working one-on-one with an alcoholic. And they're saying, man, I was behind the dumpster. I'm like, I was behind the dumpster. Y'all know, pinkies up. But I'm going to match that energy, match those stories. I'm going to share my experience. And this is the effect of that. Over and over, he would say, that's me. That's me. I drink like that. He's beginning to get the gift of identification. The man in the bed, which is apt, because that's what he's known as, number 3, man in the bed, was told of the acute poisoning from which he suffered, how it deteriorates the body of an alcoholic and warps his mind. And so what they're explaining there is essentially the allergy. They would have touched on the obsession in that sentence, but we're really going to be talking about it in the next sentence. So that acute poisoning is far more the allergy. And then it says, there was much talk about the mental state preceding the first drink. That is the obsession of the mind. And why are they emphasizing and focusing on the obsession of the mind? Because that is what makes the illness hopeless. The allergy means I need to stay sober, but the obsession means I cannot stay sober. What I mean by that is a lot of times we hear I'm powerless over alcohol. I've got this allergy. But y'all know I got some allergies. They might be more of intolerances, but I'm allergic to onions. I'm allergic to peppers. And while not an allergy, my stomach a couple of years ago stopped handling coffee. And I always want to share that with you so that I get some sympathy, because that was some bad news. That was an adjustment. But here's what I want to tell you. I am not powerless over onions and peppers and coffee. I have the power to say, no, thank you. I don't need to go to Chipotle. I have the power to say no. So that's not what makes me powerless. What makes me powerless as an alcoholic is that I know I cannot drink again. I know that I've got this allergy. Even if by the time I got here, I couldn't call it an allergy because I didn't know that, but I knew that I didn't drink like other people. I knew that when I took a drink, it took me and I ended up in situations I didn't want to end up in. What makes me powerless is despite all of that, I drink again. That's what makes me powerless. I can't stop myself from taking the first drink. And I'm emphasizing that because that's what Bill and Bob were emphasizing to Bill Dodson. And that's also what the book emphasizes to us. We don't spend too much time on the allergy. We touch on it. We spend the most time out of any chapter on the allergy in the doctor's opinion. And then we talk a little about it. I mean, obviously in Bill's story, but we talk about it a little bit, and there's a solution and a little bit, and more about alcoholism. But mostly we focus on the obsession of the mind. And this is his response after the symptoms of alcoholism were explained. He says, "Yes, that's me," said the sick man. Bill Dotson. I know. By the way, if you're wondering why the stories in the back of the book have changed, like why we changed the stories, it's because we have 3 guys and then 2 of them are named Bill, There's not a lot of variety in names, so I get you. Bill D. And it's like the sick man. I would have been like, hey, don't call me that. I mean, it's not wrong, but don't throw that at me. So, "Yes, that's me," said the sick man. "The very image. You fellows know your stuff all right, but I don't see what good it'll do. You fellows are somebody. I was once, but I'm a nobody now. From what you tell me, I know more than ever I can't stop." And that moment, I know more than ever I can't stop, that is his step 1 experience. He sees that he can't keep himself sober. He sees the reality of the desperation of the situation that he's in. Welcome, page 157, bottom of the page. And it says, at this, both visitors burst into a laugh, said the future fellow anonymous. "Damn little to laugh about that I can see." He's like, and I know nobody relates to being newly sober and especially sensitive. I know none of you guys can relate to that, but he's feeling a little sensitive. But why might they be laughing? Well, the date that they are visiting Bill Dotson is June 28th of 1935. So this visit is happening June 28th of 1935. Now, last week, we spoke about how the date we celebrate as Dr. Bob's sobriety date was probably not his sobriety date. We celebrate it as June 10th, 1935, but it is more likely to be June 17th of 1935. But nothing to drink over. Don't worry about it. But I point this out because here's Bill Dotson. He used to be a lawyer. So he used to be somebody of importance and stature, and I'm imagining lawyer clothes, and I feel like it has to involve suspenders. Otherwise, that might be a Matlock moment, is what that is in my brain. But, I imagine, and he's lying in the bed, and he's hopeless, and he sees this, and he sees Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob, and he's like, "You are somebody. I'll never be somebody." Well, Bill Wilson's, he's probably about, so he was 6 months sober when he met Dr. Bob. So he's like 7 months sober. He's a little over 7 months sober. And Dr. Bob is probably, so the 17th to the 28th, he's like 9 days sober. Yeah, he hasn't been sober, longer than 2 weeks, even if we give him the 10th, you know what I mean? Okay, 18 days, at most 18 days sober. And that's why they're laughing, because they know, like, man. And also, what is the point that I'm emphasizing behind the scenes about the humor? The point that I'm emphasizing is that it does not take long to get well. It does not take long to recover. It does not take long to have a spiritual awakening. It does not take long to make amends. It does not take long to write inventory. It does take work, which I should always caveat that with that. Like, yeah, it's going to take some work, but it doesn't have to take long if I go after it. And it said, the 2 friends. So we've laid down the information of step 1. And we saw that because they shared their experience. They explained the allergy. They explained the obsession. And I believe in that moment, he had a bit of a step 1 experience. And now what they're going to do is they're going to lay down the information for the second step. So the 2 fellows spoke of their spiritual experience, which is the solution that we have in Alcoholics Anonymous, the spiritual experience, and told them about the course of action they carried out. And so that's helping to lay down the information for the third step. See, the first step is a concession that I will drink again. The second step is a belief that maybe a spiritual awakening is possible. And the third is a decision, okay, I'm going to work your stupid 12 steps because I got nothing else. That's essentially the third step. And so they're laying down the information for Bill Dotson to go through this process. It then says he interrupted, which I am shocked. An alcoholic interrupting? What? That seems so uncouth and untoward, especially from a man that was 2 days ago strapped down tight so he wouldn't beat up the nurses. But he interrupted. I used to be strong for the church, but that won't fix it. I've prayed to God on hangover mornings and sworn that I'd never touch another drop. But by 9 o'clock, I'd be boiled as an owl. And I should have planned to have it to screen share, but I made a little sticker that says, recovered from being boiled as an owl. And it's a little owl. Because that is some beautiful language. So what he's saying is all he did was pray. And that wasn't enough to keep him sober. And that he was very religious, but that wasn't enough to keep him sober. And so they just gave him some time. Yeah, absolutely. A similar expression in the chat. So the next day found the prospect more receptive. So they gave him a bit to think it over, to have his own experience. And then he said, the next day found the prospect more receptive. He had been thinking it over. Maybe you are right, he said. God ought to be able to do anything. And that is his second step. His second step, well, I want to point out, is not, I absolutely believe in this power. I'm had my spiritual awakening. No, it's like, okay, you know what? Maybe there's a God. And if there is, maybe that would be stronger than my alcoholism. That's his second step. That's all that is required. It's that simple. Then he added, he sure didn't do much for me when I was trying to fight this booze racket alone. The acknowledgement that he couldn't do it on his own and he couldn't necessarily do it his way, the way that he had been trying. It says, on the third day, the Creator gave his life to the care and direction of his Creator and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. And what we're pointing to there is a third step decision. But I also believed, and based on like what we've, when we've bounced around to like 262, 263, it wasn't simply his third step decision. It was his third step decision combined with what later became steps 4 through 8. That he would have taken that course of action. He didn't make amends when he was in the hospital, but we're going to see. He leaves the hospital. Spoilers, he doesn't live there. So on the third day, the lawyer gave his life to the care and direction of his Creator and said he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary. And when it says he was perfectly willing to do anything necessary, that to me sounds like the third step. But I want to point out, giving our life to the care and direction of God. We talk about it in the third step, but that does not happen in the third step. In the third step, my will in my life is not turned over to God's care. My will in my life gets turned over to God's care in steps 4 through 9. And that process continues in 10, 11, and 12. So that's why I'm able to make the inference. I heard it as it came out of my mouth. I'm like, oh, that's a $10 word. But that's why I was able to make the inference that he wasn't like, I'm going to do the steps, all done, that he actually took that course of action. It goes on to say his wife came, scarcely daring to be hopeful, though she thought she saw something different about her husband already. So she wasn't holding out hope, but she was seeing the change. He had begun to have a spiritual experience. Begun. And how often do we talk about the word commence, which is to begin? And I point this out because this is a way of life. It's not a set it and forget it program. I don't do it once and think, that was great. All done now. It is how I live my life, how we are called to live our lives. It becomes this way of life, this action that we take on a daily basis. And so that's why it is begun. It says that afternoon, he put on his clothes and walked from the hospital a free man. A free man. The obsession is gone as the result of the actions that he took that brought him to the place where the spiritual awakening began within him. Freedom, that's what's on offer. Not that just don't drink and hold on and go to meetings. Because one, we can't do that. And two, this doesn't sound very free. I mean, if I keep doing that, I might pop a hernia or something like, like that's not free. And so he walked out of the hospital free man. He entered a political campaign. You ever hear don't make any major decisions in the first year? I'm just throwing out that's a little stressful. So he entered a political campaign, making speeches, frequenting men's gathering places of all sorts. And I'm sure we can infer that there's a lot of drinking and other sort of behaviors that are happening at these men's gathering places of all sorts, And we're alluding to there's a couple things we're alluding to. I was going to say we're alluding to one thing, and then my brain's like, there's three more, Paige, and I couldn't say them in order. So the first thing that we're alluding to is that we can stay sober. We can go anywhere. The true freedom, like we're pointing to, man, he could go to these places where there is drinking and he can do his campaigning. But also, an election is probably stressful to run for any sort of office. It's high pressure, it's stressful, and if you're I'm going to assume he was probably a people person, but I would imagine it would be very difficult if you're not very social. There's a lot of socializing but that you can stay sober under stress. You can stay sober under pressure. Now, the third thing that it is pointing out is that not me, but other people can become productive members of society, that we can be a part of the world. So much so that people are like, hey, you could do government things, we'll some of us will vote for you, So he entered a political campaign, making speeches, frequenting men's gathering places of all sorts, often staying up all night. He had lost the race by only a narrow margin. And actually, I will say, if Alcoholics Anonymous does nothing else, we will disturb you about the question of alcoholism. If all you do is come to a couple meetings and it'll be like, ooh, you can't unknow what you know, you can't unsee what you see, and you can't unhear what you hear. Ooh, it's going to linger. But the other thing we'll do is we'll help with public speaking. We actually, that is a side thing. Not the point though, but a wonderful side effect. Off-label, I think is what they'd call that. So he lost the race by only a narrow margin, but he had found God, and in finding God, he found himself. And I want to point something out. That is, at least for me, I'm going to only talk about my experience. That is the order. That is the order. When I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, and not even when I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, I mean, I'm a couple of years sober, and I hated myself with a vitriol that is unparalleled. I know that because people have told me that it was difficult to be around me with how negative and self-deprecating. I have that friend that said, Paige, when I met you, and that was at 2 or 3 years sober, you were the most negative and self-deprecating person that I ever met, which I always want to point out that means I win. I win. I'm number one at that. And I would have these people that would say again and again and again, you have to love yourself first. You have to love yourself first. And that just isn't my experience. And if that's yours, that's great. I'm not being critical of that. I'm telling you what my experience was. And I also, I had a home group, and we would get a lot of people it was a women's meeting, and we'd get a lot of women from a local treatment center. And at the treatment center, they were really big on affirmations. Again, if you like affirmations, I'm not being critical of that, but I will say we have some traditions. But at the I'll make my point. At the treatment center, if you said a bad word at the treatment center, like a swear word, they'd make you say affirmations. Well, the girls, they'd come to the meeting, and then I'd say a bad word, and they'd want me to do affirmations. Excuse me, we're not affiliated. Tradition 6, I don't have to do affirmations. That's the point I was making. Anyway, and I would do, let me tell you, I would do some passive aggressive, affirmation. It just genuinely was not my experience. And I think really who I'm talking to is the people that can't do the affirmations in the mirror. The people who hate themselves. The people who feel the way that I felt. I really thought I was the worst. I believed without a shadow of a doubt the world would be better without me. I knew that. You could not convince me otherwise. And then what happened? What happened is I began to lean in. I began to do this work out of this book with the energy, with the velocity, with the intensity that for somebody of my type it requires. And I changed despite myself. And what happened for me, and this is what happened, I began to see it in you. I began to see your inherent value and worth. And I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that man, God frickin' loved you. I see that and I know that, and you could not convince me otherwise. And I would see it as I worked with sponsees. And I saw that light come on in their eyes. And I see them change, and I see them absolutely transform right in front of me. And I saw that in you. And as I was doing that, there was that recollection that awareness that maybe that thing that is in you could also be in me. The thing that I'm watching happen in you. Maybe I'm not the biggest piece of garbage that ever lived. And I had this, it's funny, at the earlier Big Book study, I was talking about one of the spiritual awakenings I had, this powerful experience. And I'll tell you another one. So it feels like I'm talking about this a whole lot today, but hey, who knows? I remember I was on the phone with the sponsee. And she had been in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous for over 20 years. And her partner, essentially husband, had been in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous. And they've been together and not for over 20 years. And what was happening is I started working with her. And she began to change. And she got sober. And as she was going through this process, the gentleman, they did end up getting married, but the gentleman that became her husband, he then started to get sober. And there's a change that was happening in her life and in the life of her family. And she called me and to express gratitude, which I don't get a lot of those calls. I don't need them though. I usually get hey, this thing is happening in my home group and it's annoying. And I'm like, okay, we'll do columns. Those are mostly the calls. But, and she's expressing her gratitude to me. Now, I'll be honest. I am not somebody that naturally accepts compliments. If you think I accept compliments with grace, you have no idea. You have no idea the journey that has been on. I am not somebody that would naturally say, oh, thank you. That's very kind. It took years of spiritual work to be able to say, oh, thank you. That's very kind of you, and not be like, you're wrong. Yuck. And so she's saying these nice things about how I've helped and blah, blah, blah. Still not great with compliments, but we've improved. The blah, 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 you can tell. And there was something that came out of my mouth that was not me. It was not a thought that I had or something that I would ever say, but what came from, or I'm going to say through me, because it was not from me, was everything good in me is God. Everything good in me is God. And that is not something I promise you, that is not something that I would say. And that was one of those moments. And you see, if you're here today and you hate yourself, and you're here today and you hate your life, and you're here today and you don't know if you want to be alive to see, February, or you're here today and you don't know what's the point of all of this. I get that. I've been there. I am intimately familiar. And what happens is when I have taken a course of action that I didn't like, that I didn't believe in, that I thought was kind of dumb, and I leaned it all the way in, and I did it all, and dived in, what began to awaken within me was this inherent value and worth. Inherent. And what I mean by that is it is unchanging. I cannot make myself any less valuable by all the things that I've done wrong. And I cannot make myself any more valuable by all the things that I do right. And what I experienced, not thought about, not read about, it wasn't in a Hallmark card or nothing, but what I experienced was the God of Alcoholics Anonymous. The God that I experienced loved me in the here and now, exactly as I am. And when that awakens, not as an idea, not as a Hallmark gift card, but as an experience, that is something. And so when it says in finding God, he found himself, that's what we get to experience. So much more than just don't drink. So much more than just, do a step a year. God, please don't. Go hard at this thing. But you know what I'm saying? If sobriety was the solution, well, every time we took that first drink, we were sober. So we know it couldn't have been the solution. What I need is a transformation. What I need is an awakening. And that is available to each and every one of us. And that is a hill that I die on. So if you want to fight me after, you can fight me on that. I'm dying on that hill. Them's fighting words, Paige. All right. So that was June 1935. And his sobriety date, Bill Dotson's sobriety date, was June 26, 1935. They met him on June 28th of 1935. So they gave him 2 days to detox because they probably wanted to get the punchy out of him first, which is the clinical term. Alrighty. He never drank again. And so what we are promising, or what we're trying to say that is available, is permanent sobriety, permanent contented sobriety. That's what's available. He never drank again. He too has become a respected and useful member of his community. And again, that we get to be a part of life, not apart from it. He has helped other men recover and is a power in the church from which he is long absent. And that idea that we get to be a part of communities that are important to us. So you might not be open to church, and you don't have to be. But I would imagine being a power in his church. That is a community that was important to him. He said, I used to be strong in the church. We get to be this bringer of love and light and God's grace wherever we go. To be that power, or an expression of God's power wherever we go, wherever is the most important for us, that is powerful. And we get to help others. And there's a lovely gentleman, and he spoke about ultimately it's math. But I shouldn't have said it like that, because I might have lost some of you. I don't want to do exponents, but it is exponents. Sorry. I know some of you are getting junior high flashbacks, and that is rude of me. But if I'm an alcoholic, like I am, and if I help 3 alcoholics, and they each help 3 alcoholics, and they each help 3 alcoholics, how quickly this thing can grow, the impact that this thing can have. And keep in mind, each and every one of us here that is here today is part of that unbroken chain from Bill Wilson to Dr. Bob, and Bill Wilson and Dr. Bob to Bill Dotson. We are a part of this thing that is bigger than all of us, that we get to be a part of and connected to. And man, that is incredible, because I felt pretty alone when I got here. So he has helped other men recover and is a power in the church from which he was long absent. So you see, there were 3 alcoholics in that town who now felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. I've got to give this thing away. Otherwise, I won't keep it. I've got to sponsor others. Otherwise, I won't stay happy, and I won't stay sober. I won't stay content. I've got to work with others. So who now felt they had to give to others what they had found or be sunk. After several failures to find others, a 4th turned up. Now the 4th, his name is Ernie Galbraith. So I'll do my best to spell it for you. E-A-R-N-I-E, that's Ernie. Not of Bert and Ernie, focus. And Galbraith is G-A-L-B-R-A-I-T-H. And he is AA number 4. So after several failures to find after several failures to find others, a fourth turned up. And again, they're working, they're trying, and it's not always about results. And we'll talk a little about Ernie Galbraith, and he didn't stay. Spoilers: he didn't stay sober. But it was. Oh, I'm actually. You know what? I'm on the tangent. Let's just go on the tangent. So Ernie Galbraith. Yeah, while we're on it, let's just go. Ernie Galbraith, devil may care chap. He didn't end up staying sober. But he was on a bit of a bender, and he was wandering around Akron, Ohio, which I would assume if I was drinking in Akron, that's what I would do too. And he runs into this really beautiful young woman, not age appropriate, by the way. That's just my opinion. A really beautiful, not age appropriate young woman and he's like, "Hey, do you know where Dr. Bob's house is? I'm looking for that." And she's like, "Why, yes. He's my father. Let me show you." Yikes. And so thus began their relationship. And it was a disaster. And there's more of if anyone's interested in like true crime type stuff. Yeah, he was Dr. Bob's son-in-law. It didn't go well. And if anyone's interested in true crime type stuff, there's a sad story that happens the next generation down. I won't go into it here, but yeah. And again, sometimes, and I talk about this stuff because sometimes it's not pretty. Sometimes it's not easy. Sometimes Dr. Bob is calling Ernie a son of a bee because he's frustrated with him. Like that we're human, that we're not going to be perfect. And even somebody that you might want to be like, Dr. Bob, like he's credited with working with something like 5,000 alcoholics in his 16 years of sobriety before he passed away. Oh, and Bill D, he had about 19 years of sobriety before he passed away. So like these guys were having this sobriety. That we might think like Saint Bob, like he was such a good guy. Yeah, and he was not happy about Ernie. He did not handle that perfectly. So we're allowed to be human. We're allowed to make mistakes. God uses all of it. So after several failures to find others, a fourth turned up. He came through an acquaintance who had heard the good news. He proved to be a devil-may-care young fellow whose parents could not make out whether he wanted to stop drinking or not. They were deeply religious people, much shocked by their son's refusal to have anything to do with the church. He suffered horribly from his sprees, but it seemed as if nothing could be done for him. Now, when it talks about suffering horribly from his sprees, that is a sign that Ernie had the allergy of the body. Because if he did not suffer, if he had the ability to control the amount he drank, he would drink before suffering horribly after. You know what I mean? He would stop before horrible suffering. That would be a line, and he would hit it and be like, "No, thank you." And when it talks about they couldn't make up whether he wanted to quit drinking or not, I believe that is pointing to the obsession of the mind. Because what was probably happening was he was saying, "I promise I want to stop. I promise I want to stop. I promise I want to stop." And we saw that there were consequences in his life. And he would say, I've suffered horribly. I don't want to do it again. Only to do it again a day, a week, a month later. So that is likely a sign that he has the obsession of the mind. So he suffered horribly from his sprees, but it seemed nothing could be done for him. Again, a sign that this might be hopeless, that the things he's trying is not working. He consented, however, to go to the hospital, where he occupied the very room vacated by the lawyer. He had 3 visitors. And I point that out because it's not like one of the bills was like, "Hey, no, I'm busy today. I'd like to do other things. I got a political campaign to run, or I'm trying to get those rubber companies and get their money while I'm visiting." They knew the importance of working with others, so they were almost like tripping over each other to try and help carry this message. So they had 3 visitors. After a bit, he said, "The way you fellows put this spiritual stuff makes sense." And then he says, "I'm ready to do business." Being ready to do business is his 3rd step decision. So they had obviously explained to him what alcoholism was. And he's like, yep, I got that. And as they were talking about that spiritual stuff, he's like, you know what? That makes sense. I'm ready to do business. I'm willing to work these 12 steps. They definitely weren't outlined as 12 steps at that point in AA history. But he's essentially saying, I'm willing to do this work, his third step. And it says, so one more was added to the fellowship. And we're at time, so we'll leave it there, and we'll see what happens as the fellowship begins to grow.